So, Jake, you are the head of delegation for the European Union negotiating team at COP30. So, for those that don't know, what does that mean? What is the job that you're doing?
Well, it's not an easy one to describe, but it starts with the first responsibility of gathering the team within the DG and then within the Commission at large. So the issue of climate change, including on the international level, affects the interests of many units within DG Klima that are working on everything from setting the targets for the EU to running the transparency systems to designing the EU's participation in international carbon markets. They all need to contribute in one way or another to forming the EU's position and negotiating it at the international level. We then have to move beyond Klima to the other DGs that are also interested in these issues, our colleagues in DG Trade, our colleagues in DG Environment, DG Agriculture, DG Grow. They also want to make sure that their voices are heard in the formation of the Commission's approaches to international negotiations. And then, of course, because we're representing the European Union, we have to engage the member states as well. They're absolutely critical players in the implementation of European domestic policies, but also in setting our positions when we negotiate internationally. And so as the head of the EU delegation, I also represent the Commission in the EU Working Party that's responsible for convening all the heads of delegation of the 27 member states under the rotating presidency to design and agree and adopt our negotiating positions. Then when we actually meet our counterparts, all the 193 other parties to the Paris Agreement, we have to structure ourselves in the way in which the EU, having formed these positions, actually speaks with one voice. And there I take on the role as one of the EU lead negotiators. There are three of us at the moment. Two of them come from member state governments, one from Finland and one from Poland at the moment. And there's always a lead negotiator from the Commission as well. And we negotiate at what we call heads of delegation level. So basically at the relationship between the political negotiations and the technical negotiations. And then, of course, every COP happens once a year. We'll move into a ministerial level negotiation and then a leaders level negotiation as well. And so as EU head of delegation, I play a role in preparing our commissioner to be the chief negotiator at the ministerial level, together with his counterpart from the rotating presidency. And that's a very exciting and important part of my role as well.
Great, thanks, Jake. So, incredibly complex job that you have to do already, just organizationally. And I think going into COP30 this year in Brazil, we know that there's an ambition gap that still needs to be tackled. It's not looking good in terms of commitments which are being made around the world. So, what's your ambition for COP30? What are you hoping to achieve with the EU team?
Yeah, so I mean, every COP is different, and every COP kind of sets a benchmark for what a successful COP will look like. And the EU always tries to play a role in making sure that that benchmark of expectations is as ambitious as possible, but still achievable, so that we don't confront some kind of failure or collapse as a result of heading, as a result of setting our expectations too high. This year is a bit unique in that it won't really be the negotiations that deliver that ambitious outcome, but more the individual parties themselves. It's the way in which they will be delivering on their nationally determined contributions, their emissions reductions targets under the Paris Agreement, that when added up will give us a sense of whether or not the EU, together with all the other parties to the Paris Agreement, are setting the global economy on a pathway to being net zero in time to prevent the most dangerous climate change. So these NDCs have been coming in slowly over the course of the year. There was an original deadline set for the 10th of February. Nearly every party missed that. We tried to build up the pressure to deliver in time for the summit that happened at the General Assembly last week. And the EU and others sent additional signals at that summit. But the real political deadline will be the delivery by the COP. And the EU is committed to delivering its NDC in time for that. And the hope is that all of those NDCs will add up in such a way that provide a persuasive narrative that the Paris Agreement is still working, that individual policies that countries are putting in place are responding to the challenge of the Paris Agreement, and equally important, that the real economy is moving in this direction towards decarbonization as well. That's where we are increasingly investing, is in the alternatives to fossil fuels rather than the continuation of fossil fuels. And there will be, for this COP as well, what makes it unique, a strong counter narrative coming from part of the world that has decided that we should be doubling down on investments in fossil fuels and that we should be disregarding what the science is telling us about the urgency to act on climate change. So all the more important that we have a very strong narrative. I think it's pretty clear from what we're seeing from those major economies that have delivered their NDCs so far that it is unlikely that the story that those NDCs will tell on their own will give the international community the reassurance that we are in a pathway to net zero. They just won't add up to being enough. And so that then raises this issue of the ambition gap. How does the Belém COP30 respond to the ambition gap? And I think it will have to be a quite sophisticated and complex narrative, right? One will be that, well, countries are inherently, maybe this is outside of the EU, but certainly in other jurisdictions, are inherently modest and conservative in the way in which they set out their expectations for the decarbonization of their economies, and that the real economy will be telling the true story of the pace of change that's happening in the real world. And that for large economies like China, and they encourage us to think this way, China does, that they will actually outperform the targets that they set for themselves. So that ambition gap represents a set of targets, but it may not represent what's actually happening in the real world in terms of the direction that investments are going anyway. So that will be part of the response. They will also have to be a part of the response that is internationally negotiated, whether it's the leaders sending similar messages at the global level about their commitment to Paris and to decarbonization, or it's what the negotiators like myself and my counterparts will be producing in terms of agreed text. And here we think it's very important to send a signal that we are aware of the gap, that we are pleased with the fact that so many parties have come forward with NDCs and that those NDCs represent genuine domestic policies, but that the international process has to keep trying to close that gap. And there are many ways in which we can do so. We can do it by increasing our investments, both domestically and internationally, in mitigation reduction efforts. And there will be a whole roadmap that comes forward at Belém that kind of spells out more specifically how the EU as a donor, but also how the international community as a whole can try to shape public and private finance more aligned with the Paris Agreement goals. So strong messages on climate finance will be absolutely critical for success in Belém. And the EU in particular will be trying to raise the profile of carbon markets, both as a source of policies that drive emissions down, but also as a potential source of investments in third countries and in the ability of any jurisdiction to raise resources that they can invest in the decarbonization of the economy as well. So we're hoping together with Brazil and kind of a broader coalition of countries that are putting in place carbon markets and carbon pricing schemes to give particular emphasis to that as well. And then finally, and I think very importantly, given that we are continuing to see global average temperatures rise, we're facing this ambition gap in terms of the pathways to net zero, and we're seeing impacts of climate change around the world. The COP also has to give hope to those countries, particularly the poorest and the most vulnerable around the world, that support will be there for them in improving their ability to adapt and to enhance their resilience to climate change. So one critical negotiated deliverable from Belém is a set of indicators, which may not attract a lot of attention from the press, but they are indicators designed to help policymakers on the ground better understand their vulnerabilities and better plan for addressing those and strengthening their resilience to the impacts of climate change. So those indicators for the global goal on adaptation, I think, will help to complete that package of the need for more ambition on reducing emissions, the need for more finance to make sure that we're investing in decarbonization, and then finally, the interest in the international community in supporting vulnerable communities address the impacts of climate change.
Okay, thanks, Jake. I mean, there's obviously so much going on at these COPs, and you've seen many of them over the years and seen the steps that are being taken every time. But we know that it's a a process that can be criticized from the outside, that people don't understand what's happening, don't think it's doing enough or moving fast enough. So as an insider, how do you respond to those kind of comments?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this expectation that year to year, COP to COP, we're going to finally save the planet from the fate of climate change, I think is something that has helped ensure that it's an absolutely key event at the end of each year. I think it continues to be the UN event that attracts the most leaders from around the world, and it needs to do that in order to keep the pressure on to raise the awareness year to year, given all the distractions from that priority that are happening in today's geopolitical context. So that's great. But it also creates an expectation that a COP alone can never meet. At the end of the day, it is a multilateral moment of diplomacy where we try to send political signals, we try to reach new agreements amongst ourselves as to how we could and should do better. But the real action starts on the ground with the choices that individuals make, and very importantly, particularly for the EU, it must continue to be robust legislation that doesn't just send signals, but actually requires our economies to bend themselves towards this pathway of decarbonization. So it's an annual event, but the work is year round for those that are committed to addressing this incredibly important challenge.
Thank you very much, Jake, and best of luck to you with this incredibly important challenge.
Thanks, Tim.